The wind carried the scent of rain as Jeremiah Irwin stared at the distant horizon from his porch, the weathered boards creaking beneath his weight. It had been 93 days since he'd set foot in Wallace, Colorado, not that he was counting. The year was 1878, and the world had shifted beneath his feet when the telegram arrived announcing his brother's death, leaving him this remote homestead 15 miles from town. The first drops of rain began to fall as he retreated inside, pulling the door closed against the gathering storm. The cabin, a sturdy two-room affair his brother had built with his own hands, felt empty despite the furniture and belongings Jeremiah had brought from his previous life in Denver. At 32, he'd never expected to be starting over as a cattle rancher, but grief had a way of changing a man's path. Lightning flashed outside the window as Jeremiah stoked the fire in the wood stove. The flames cast dancing shadows across the room as he settled into the chair beside it, a book in his lap that he couldn't seem to focus on. The words blurred together as his thoughts drifted back to that day in April when he'd packed his life into 2 trunks and headed for Wallace. He'd been a bookkeeper in Denver, comfortable with numbers and ledgers. Out here, his hands were developing calluses from work they'd never known before. 15 head of cattle, a small vegetable garden, and endless repairs to fences and outbuildings kept him busy from dawn till dusk. It was honest work, physically demanding in a way that left him too tired to think about what he'd lost. Daniel had been the adventurous one, 4 years his senior and always chasing the next opportunity. Their parents had passed years ago, leaving just the 2 of them. Now it was just Jeremiah, alone with the wind and the prairie stretching for miles in every direction. He hadn't meant to become a hermit. The first few weeks after arriving, he'd made the journey into Wallace regularly for supplies and mail. The townsfolk had been welcoming enough, though curious about the newcomer who'd inherited the Irwin place. But as spring turned to summer, the trips became less frequent. The weight of conversations with strangers, their pitying glances when they learned of Daniel's passing, it all became too much to bear. So he'd stocked up on essentials, enough flour and coffee and ammunition to last months. There was game to hunt, vegetables from the garden, and the creek provided fresh water. He had books for company and work to occupy his hands. What need did he have for town? As July turned to August, he realized it had been over a month since he'd last made the journey. By September, the count had stretched to nearly 3 months. His mail would be piling up at the Wallace post office, but there was nothing urgent expected. No one who would write to him with news he couldn't wait to hear. The storm raged through the night, and Jeremiah slept fitfully, waking to a world washed clean. The morning sun glinted off puddles in the yard as he went about his chores, feeding the chickens, checking on the cattle, repairing a section of fence damaged in the storm. It was mid-afternoon when he spotted the dust cloud on the horizon, a rider approaching from the direction of town. Jeremiah shaded his eyes against the sun, watching as the figure drew closer. It wasn't often he had visitors out this way. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles south, and they had an unspoken agreement to respect each other's solitude. As the rider came into focus, Jeremiah realized with surprise it was a woman. She sat straight-backed in the saddle, controlling her chestnut mare with easy confidence. Her dark blue riding skirt was hitched up slightly to accommodate the side saddle, and a matching jacket hugged her frame. A wide-brimmed hat shaded her face, but he could see auburn hair pinned up beneath it. Curiosity drew him toward the fence line as she approached. The woman reined her horse to a stop a respectful distance away, studying him with open interest. "Mr. Irwin," she called, her voice clear and steady. "Yes, madam," he answered, suddenly conscious of his disheveled appearance, worn trousers tucked into mud-caked boots, shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal sun-browned forearms. "I'm Zara Patterson, the new postmistress in Wallace." She reached into the saddlebag beside her and withdrew a bundle tied with string. "You've quite a collection of mail accumulated at the office, Since you haven't been to town in some time, I thought I'd bring it out to you." Jeremiah crossed to the gate and opened it, allowing her to guide her horse into the yard. He approached as she dismounted with practiced ease. "That's very kind of you, Miss Patterson. I didn't realize mail delivery was part of the postmistress's duties." A slight smile curved her lips. "It isn't typically, but I've been trying to get acquainted with the area and everyone in it." She handed him the bundle. "And I confess I was curious about the man who's become something of a mystery in Wallace." "A mystery?" He raised an eyebrow, accepting the mail. "The reclusive Mr. Irwin, who appeared in town after his brother's passing and then vanished back to his homestead." She glanced around the property. "People talk when someone new arrives and then stops coming around." Jeremiah shifted uncomfortably under her frank assessment. Up close, he could see she was perhaps 25 or 26, with clear green eyes that missed nothing. Freckles dusted the bridge of her nose, and there was a determined set to her jaw that suggested she wasn't easily deterred. "I've been busy with the place," he said, gesturing vaguely at the homestead. "Haven't had much reason to go into town." "Well, now you have one less reason," she said lightly. "I've brought your mail." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and they both looked to the western sky where dark clouds were gathering again. "Another storm coming," Jeremiah observed. "You should probably start back if you want to beat it to town." Zara Patterson glanced at the approaching clouds, then back at him with a raised brow. "Mr. Irwin, I've just ridden 15 miles to deliver your mail. Would you begrudge me a cup of coffee before I make the return journey?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. It had been months since he'd entertained a visitor, let alone a woman he'd just met. But the thunder rolled again, closer this time, and refusing her seemed both churlish and dangerous given the approaching weather. "Of course," he said finally. "You're welcome to wait out the storm here." "I'll see to your horse." "Thank you." She handed him the reins. "This is Penny. She's gentle but doesn't care for thunder." Jeremiah led the mare to the small stable where his own gelding nickered a greeting. By the time he'd unsaddled Penny and made sure both horses had fresh hay and water, the first fat raindrops were beginning to fall. He hurried back to the cabin, where he found Zara standing on the porch, watching the storm roll in across the plains. The wind whipped tendrils of auburn hair free from her pins, and she tucked them back absently. "Impressive, isn't it?" she said as he joined her. "The way you can see the weather coming for miles out here." "It's one of the things I've come to appreciate," he admitted. "In Denver, the mountains block the view. Here, there's nothing hidden." She turned to look at him then, those clear green eyes searching his face. "Nothing except the men who live here, perhaps." Before he could respond to that pointed observation, the skies opened and rain began to pour in earnest. Jeremiah pushed open the cabin door. "After you, Miss Patterson." Inside, Jeremiah busied himself with the coffee pot, grateful for the mundane task as he became acutely aware of how bare the cabin must seem. There were few decorative touches: a quilt his mother had made draped over the back of a chair, a landscape painting that had belonged to Daniel on one wall. The rest was functional. A table with 4 chairs, a sideboard with dishes, the wood stove that served for both cooking and heat, and the chair where he spent his evenings reading. "You've made this place your own," Zara commented, removing her hat and jacket. Her hair was coming loose from its pins, curling slightly in the damp air. "Not really," he replied honestly. "It was Daniel's place, I'm just living in it." She nodded as though his answer confirmed something for her. "How long did your brother live here?" 6 years. Jeremiah measured coffee grounds into the pot. "He came west after the war like a lot of men, wanted open space and a fresh start." "And you, what brought you to Wallace besides inheriting the property?" Jeremiah paused, the question catching him off guard. No one in town had asked him so directly. They'd offered condolences and platitudes, but no one had questioned his decision to stay. "Daniel was all the family I had left," he said finally. "When he died, well, someone had to settle his affairs. I didn't intend to stay at first, but you did." It wasn't a question, he nodded, placing the coffee pot on the stove. I found I wasn't in a hurry to go back to Denver. My job there was just a job. Here. He gestured toward the window where rain lashed against the glass. Here, there's something real about the work. The land demands your attention. It doesn't care about ledgers or accounts. You were a bookkeeper. Her eyebrows rose in surprise. For a mercantile company, not very exciting. And now you're a cattle rancher. A smile played at the corners of her mouth. Quite a change, Mr. Irwin. Jeremiah, he said, surprising himself. If you're going to ride 15 miles through Colorado territory to bring me my mail, you might as well call me Jeremiah. Jeremiah, she repeated, and something about the way she said his name made his chest tighten. And you should call me Zara, since we're apparently neighbors now. The coffee began to boil, and he moved the pot to the edge of the stove. As he reached for cups from the shelf, he asked, "How did you come to be the postmistress in Wallace? You don't sound like you're from around here." "I'm not," she admitted. "I grew up in Boston. My father was a professor at Harvard, my mother a physician's daughter. They had very specific ideas about the suitable life for their only daughter, which didn't include becoming a postmistress in a western town," he guessed. Precisely. She accepted the steaming cup he offered. "Thank you." They envisioned a socially advantageous marriage, children, charity committees, all the trappings of Boston society. And you wanted something different. Zara blew across the surface of her coffee, watching him over the rim of the cup. "I wanted to choose my own path. When my uncle, my mother's brother, wrote that Wallace needed someone to run the post office, I saw my opportunity. My parents were scandalized, of course, but I was 24 and determined. How long have you been here?" "Just 2 months. I arrived in June." She sipped her coffee and made an appreciative sound. "This is excellent, much better than what they serve at the hotel dining room." Daniel insisted on good coffee. "It's one habit I've maintained." Thunder crashed overhead, making the windows rattle. "Sounds like you'll be here a while." The worst storms can last for hours. Instead of appearing concerned, Zara looked almost pleased. "Then perhaps you can show me what you've done with the place. I'm curious about how a bookkeeper transitions to ranching." "Not very successfully at times," he admitted with a wry smile. "The first week, I nearly got trampled trying to move the herd to a new pasture. Had to be rescued by my neighbor to the south, Mr. Callahan. He's been raising cattle for 30 years and found my city ways amusing. But you persevered. Didn't have much choice. The cattle needed tending, the garden needed planting, and the roof needed patching." He shrugged. "So I learned." As the storm continued to rage outside, Jeremiah found himself telling Zara about his first months on the homestead, the mistakes he'd made, the lessons he'd learned the hard way, the gradual shift from feeling like an imposter to developing a grudging competence with the daily tasks of rural life. In turn, she shared stories of her adjustment to Wallace, the initial skepticism from some townsfolk about a female postmistress, particularly one from the East, her boarding arrangement with the widow Simmons, the gradual process of earning people's trust as she proved herself capable and discreet with their correspondence. "People tell their postmaster a great deal, often without realizing it," she said. "You can learn much about a community from the mail that passes through your hands." "Is that why you brought mine personally?" he asked, professional curiosity about the hermit. She laughed, and the sound was warm in the cabin. "Partly, but also because Mrs. Simmons mentioned you hadn't been seen in town for months, and someone should check that you hadn't met with an accident out here alone. And had I been lying injured in a ditch somewhere? Then I would have fetched the doctor," she said practically, "or offered what assistance I could. I've some training in basic medical care. My mother insisted on it." The rain began to slacken, and Jeremiah realized with surprise that they'd been talking for over an hour. The bundle of mail she'd brought sat unopened on the table between them. "You should see what correspondence has been waiting for you," Zara suggested, following his gaze to the package. "There might be something important." He untied the string and sorted through the items, a few business letters regarding Daniel's estate, a catalog from a seed company, a circular about a new type of fence wire, and a letter from his former employer in Denver inquiring if he intended to return. "Nothing that couldn't wait," he said, setting them aside. "Yet now you have them, thanks to postal service that extends beyond the usual boundaries." Her eyes twinkled with amusement. "Perhaps I should make this a regular route." "That's not necessary," he said quickly. "I'll come into town for my mail." "Will you?" She raised an eyebrow. "It's been 3 months already. I've been meaning to, just haven't found the time." "Well, now you know what you've been missing." She rose and walked to the window. "The rain has stopped. I should start back if I want to reach town before dark." Jeremiah felt a strange reluctance to see her go. The cabin would seem emptier somehow after her departure, the silence more pronounced. "I'll fetch your horse," he said, rising as well. Outside, the world smelled of wet earth and greenery. Puddles reflected the sky, which was clearing to the west where the sun was breaking through the clouds. Jeremiah saddled Penny while Zara donned her jacket and hat, which had dried near the stove. "Thank you for the coffee and conversation," she said, as he led the mare from the stable. "It was a pleasant way to wait out the storm." "Thank you for the mail delivery," he replied. "It was unexpected." She mounted with practiced grace, settling her skirts around her. Looking down at him from the saddle, her expression turned serious. "The world doesn't stop turning just because we step away from it, Jeremiah. Sometimes the things we're avoiding find ways to reach us anyway." Before he could respond, she clicked her tongue to Penny and turned the horse toward the road. "I'll see you in Wallace one of these days," she called over her shoulder. "Or perhaps I'll bring your mail again next month." He watched her ride away, a solitary figure growing smaller against the vast landscape. Only when she was a distant speck did he turn back to the cabin, which seemed unnaturally quiet after her departure. The coffee cup still sat on the table, and the faint scent of her something floral mixed with leather and rain lingered in the air. Jeremiah picked up the bundle of mail she'd brought, turning it over in his hands. Then he glanced at the calendar tacked to the wall beside the door. Perhaps it was time to make a trip into Wallace after all. But the days passed, and Jeremiah found reasons to postpone the journey. A fence section needed reinforcing, one of the cows fell ill, and then there was the matter of the leaky roof over the lean-to storage shed. Before he knew it, 2 weeks had slipped by since Zara's visit. He was splitting wood in the yard when he heard hoofbeats approaching. Shading his eyes against the October sun, he recognized the chestnut mare and its rider immediately. Something fluttered in his chest that he chose not to examine too closely. Zara rode into the yard with the same confidence as before, though today she wore a dark green riding outfit that complemented her auburn hair. She carried another package tied with string, smaller this time. "Good afternoon, Jeremiah," she called, dismounting before he could offer assistance. "I see you're still finding reasons to avoid town." "Miss Patterson," he acknowledged, setting down his axe, "this is becoming a habit." "Zara," she corrected, leading Penny toward the water trough. "And yes, it appears it is. Though I don't mind the ride, the country between here and Wallace is beautiful this time of year." He couldn't argue with that. The cottonwoods along the creek were turning golden, and the grasslands had taken on the rich amber hues of autumn. "Still," he said, "it's a long way to come for mail delivery." "I didn't come only for that." She reached into her saddlebag and produced a cloth-wrapped package. "Mrs. Simmons sent some of her apple tarts. She says every man living alone needs something sweet occasionally to remind him of civilization." The gesture caught him off guard. "That's very thoughtful. She's a kind woman and an excellent baker." Zara handed him both packages. "The mail first, though. There's something in there you'll want to see." Curious, Jeremiah untied the string on the mail bundle. Among the few items was an official-looking envelope bearing the seal of the Colorado Territorial Government. "What's this?" he asked, turning it over in his hands. "I wouldn't know," Zara said, though her expression suggested otherwise. "The contents of people's mail is private, but that particular office tends to send important notifications." Jeremiah broke the seal and unfolded the letter. As he read, his eyebrows rose in surprise. "They're putting in a new road," he said. "It will cut through the southeast corner of this property. There's to be a hearing in Wallace next Tuesday for affected landowners." "As I said, important," Zara replied, satisfaction in her tone. "Had I not brought your mail, you might have missed it entirely." Jeremiah frowned at the implications. This road would change things. There'd be more traffic past the homestead, strangers using it as a thoroughfare. "Progress comes whether we welcome it or not," she observed. "Though I imagine you could raise objections at the hearing if you attend." He folded the letter and slipped it back into its envelope. "It seems I'll be making that trip to town after all." "Indeed." She smiled, and he had the distinct impression she'd known exactly what was in that envelope before delivering it. "Now, how about some coffee to go with those tarts? I've another hour before I need to start back." This time, Jeremiah found the process of making coffee for his visitor less awkward. He moved around the cabin with more confidence, aware of her watching him from her seat at the table. "You've tidied up since my last visit," she observed. He hadn't realized she would notice the small changes, the books arranged more neatly on the shelf, the new curtains he'd ordered from the mercantile catalog, the wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill. "Just some minor improvements," he said, feeling inexplicably self-conscious. "It makes a difference." She unwrapped the apple tarts, their cinnamon fragrance filling the cabin. "A home needs a woman's touch," my mother always said, though I think that's not entirely true. A home needs care from whoever lives there. "And what about your home?" he asked, bringing the coffee to the table. "Have you made the room at Mrs. Simmons's your own, as much as one can in a boarding arrangement?" She accepted the cup he offered. "I've my books and a few keepsakes, but it's temporary. I hope to have my own place eventually." "In Wallace." He was surprised to find himself genuinely interested in her answer. "Perhaps." She broke an apple tart in half, offering a portion to him. "I'm not certain yet. I came west seeking independence, but I haven't decided if Wallace is where I'll put down roots." "What would make you stay?" The question slipped out before he could consider its implications. Zara met his eyes directly. "The right opportunities, meaningful work, a sense of belonging." She paused, taking a sip of her coffee. "Connections worth preserving." There was something in her gaze that made him look away first, uncertain how to respond. Instead, he bit into the apple tart, savoring the perfect balance of sweet and tart. "Mrs. Simmons is indeed an excellent baker," he said after a moment. "She is." Zara allowed the subject to change. "She's lived in Wallace since its founding. Her husband was one of the first storekeepers there. She has wonderful stories about the early days." They spent the next hour in conversation that flowed more naturally than Jeremiah would have expected. Zara told him about the latest happenings in Wallace, the new schoolteacher who'd arrived from St. Louis, the plans for expanding the mercantile, the dispute between the saloon owner and the Temperance Society ladies. "It's quite a lively little community once you get beneath the surface," she concluded. "Not unlike Boston in that way, though on a much smaller scale. People are people wherever you go. And you observe them all from your post office window," he said with a hint of amusement. "It's an education," she admitted. "In Boston, I knew only people of my parents' circle, academics, physicians, the occasional lawyer or businessman. Here, I interact with everyone from the mayor to the blacksmith's apprentice. And hermit ranchers who don't collect their mail," he added dryly. She laughed, the sound bright in the quiet cabin. "Those are particularly interesting specimens." When it came time for her to leave, Jeremiah found himself inventing reasons to prolong her stay, offering more coffee, asking questions about the road proposal, even inquiring about the condition of the trail back to town. But eventually, she rose and retrieved her hat and jacket. "I'll see you Tuesday at the hearing then?" she asked as he walked her to where Penny waited outside. "Yes," he promised, "I'll be there." She studied him for a moment, as though assessing the sincerity of his commitment. "The hearing begins at 10 o'clock in the town hall. Don't be late." "I won't." He helped her mount, his hands at her waist briefly as she settled into the saddle. The contact, even through layers of clothing, sent an unexpected warmth through him. "Thank you for the delivery," he said, stepping back. "And please convey my appreciation to Mrs. Simmons for the tarts." "I will." She gathered the reins. "Take care of yourself, Jeremiah Irwin. These hills can get lonely when winter comes." He watched her ride away, feeling as though something significant had shifted in his carefully ordered existence. The cabin behind him no longer seemed like the refuge it had been this morning. Instead, it felt like what it was, a solitary dwelling far from the community of Wallace, where life continued without him. For the first time since arriving at the homestead, Jeremiah found himself looking forward to going to town. Tuesday morning dawned clear and crisp, with the first real bite of autumn in the air. Jeremiah rose before sunrise, giving himself ample time to complete his chores before the long ride to Wallace. He shaved carefully, noting with surprise that the face in the mirror looked more weathered than he remembered, the sun and wind having left their mark over the past months. He dressed in his best shirt and the wool vest that had rarely been worn since leaving Denver. Practical considerations dictated the rest of his attire: sturdy trousers and well-broken-in boots that would serve for both riding and walking around town. The journey to Wallace took almost 2 hours, the trail winding through grasslands and stands of cottonwood and aspen now brilliant with fall colors. As he crested the final rise, the town came into view in the valley below a collection of wooden buildings arranged along a main street, with houses and smaller establishments spreading outward. Smoke rose from chimneys, and he could make out figures moving about their business. It was larger than he remembered, or perhaps it had grown in the months since his last visit. Either way, he felt a flutter of anxiety as he urged his gelding forward. He had become accustomed to solitude, to the rhythm of days marked only by the rising and setting of the sun. Town meant people, questions, social expectations he'd forgotten how to navigate. The main street was busy with morning activity as Jeremiah rode in. He nodded to those who looked his way, noting the flickers of recognition and curiosity. Outside the general store, he dismounted and secured his horse to the hitching post, patting the animal's neck reassuringly. "Well, look who's rejoined the land of the living," came a voice from the store's doorway. Herman Schmidt, the proprietor, stood with arms crossed, a smile crinkling his weathered face. "Daniel's brother back from the wilderness, Mr. Schmidt," Jeremiah acknowledged, extending his hand. "Good to see you, likewise." The storekeeper's handshake was firm. "Beginning to think the coyotes got you out there, or that you'd packed up for Denver after all." "Just been busy with the homestead," Jeremiah replied, the familiar excuse feeling thin even to his own ears. "Well, you picked a good day to come in. That road hearing has brought folks from all over the county." Schmidt glanced toward the town hall where people were already gathering. "You headed there now, soon. Thought I'd stop at the post office first." Schmidt's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Ah, to thank our new postmistress for her special delivery service, I expect." Heat crept up Jeremiah's neck. "News travels fast. It's Wallace," the storekeeper said with a shrug. "Miss Patterson's rides out to your place have been noted with interest. She's been a breath of fresh air in this town, efficient with the mail and not afraid to take initiative. She mentioned bringing my correspondence was her own idea, not an official service," Jeremiah acknowledged. "Indeed." Schmidt studied him thoughtfully. "She's turned more than a few heads since arriving. Educated Eastern lady choosing to come west makes a man wonder what she's looking for out here." Before Jeremiah could respond to that loaded observation, the town clock struck 9:45. "I should get to the hearing," he said, tipping his hat. "Good talking with you, Mr. Schmidt. Don't be such a stranger next time," the storekeeper called after him. "Your brother was in every week like clockwork." The comparison stung more than Jeremiah would have expected. Daniel had embraced this community, become part of its fabric. Jeremiah had inherited his property but had done nothing to claim his place among these people. The town hall was filling quickly when he arrived. He slipped into a seat near the back, scanning the room automatically for a particular auburn-haired figure. He spotted her almost immediately, seated behind a small table to one side, sorting through what appeared to be documents related to the hearing. She was dressed more formally than he'd seen before, in a high-necked blue dress with her hair neatly pinned up beneath a modest hat. As though sensing his gaze, Zara looked up. When she saw him, a genuine smile lit her face and she nodded in acknowledgement. Something in his chest tightened at that smile, a feeling both unfamiliar and strangely welcome. The hearing proceeded with the expected bureaucratic formality. Representatives from the territorial government explained the proposed road, which would connect Wallace more directly to the mining operations to the southwest. Maps were displayed showing the planned route, cutting across the corner of the Irwin property and several other homesteads. When landowners were invited to speak, Jeremiah found himself rising from his seat. He hadn't planned to address the gathering, but something compelled him forward. "My name is Jeremiah Irwin," he began, his voice steadier than he expected. "The proposed route crosses the southeast section of my late brother's homestead, which I now own." He paused, aware of all eyes upon him, including Zara's intent gaze. "I've studied the maps, and I noticed the road would require cutting through a stand of cottonwoods along the creek. Those trees provide valuable shelter for the property and wildlife habitat." Gaining confidence, he continued, "I would ask that the planners consider shifting the route slightly northward on my land, where there's a natural clearing. It would preserve the trees and actually provide a more level path for the road itself." There were murmurs of interest, and the head surveyor made notes while asking several follow-up questions about the terrain. By the time Jeremiah returned to his seat, he felt a curious sense of accomplishment. He had spoken not just for himself, but for the land his brother had loved, had engaged with the community in a meaningful way for the first time. Other landowners followed with their own concerns and suggestions. The hearing lasted until noon, concluding with assurances that all input would be considered before the final route was determined. As people filed out of the hall, Jeremiah made his way to where Zara was gathering her papers. "You came," she said simply, looking up at him. "I said I would." "Yes, but saying and doing are different matters." Her eyes held a warmth that belied the formality of her words. "I'm glad you spoke up. Your suggestion about the route made good sense." "It was Daniel who taught me the value of those trees," he admitted. "He planted some of them himself, said they'd be worth their weight in gold during winter storms." "Your brother sounds like he was a wise man." "In many ways, yes." Jeremiah hesitated, then continued, "I was wondering if you might join me for lunch, as a thank you for delivering my mail. Schmidt mentioned there's a cafe now next to the hotel." The invitation surprised him as much as it seemed to please her. "I'd like that," she replied. "I need to drop these papers at the post office first, if you don't mind accompanying me there." They walked together down the main street, Jeremiah acutely aware of the glances cast their way. Zara seemed untroubled by the attention, greeting several people by name as they passed. The post office occupied a small but well-kept building with large front windows. Inside, wooden cubicles lined one wall, and a counter separated the public area from the sorting room behind. The space was orderly and brightened by a vase of autumn flowers on the counter. "My domain," Zara said with a hint of pride as she unlocked a door behind the counter. "It's not grand, but it's mine to manage as I see fit." Jeremiah looked around with new appreciation, seeing the space through her eyes a place of responsibility and independence, her first real claim to a self-determined life. "It suits you," he said honestly. "Organized, efficient, at the heart of the community." She glanced up, seeming pleased by his observation. "Most people just see letters and packages. They don't think about what they represent: connections between people across miles and years. You see the larger meaning in things," he said. "It's a gift." A slight flush colored her cheeks, A tendency to overthink, my father would say. She placed the hearing documents in a drawer and locked it. There, I'm ready for lunch now if you are. The cafe was busy with the midday crowd, but they found a small table near the window. Jeremiah was conscious of curious eyes, aware that his reappearance in town after months of absence, accompanied by the new postmistress, would fuel conversation. "You're uncomfortable," Zara observed after they'd ordered. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone paying attention." Her directness was refreshing. "You don't like being the subject of speculation. Does anyone?" "Some court it deliberately." She smiled slightly. "But no, most prefer to move through life unremarked. You've chosen a rather dramatic way of avoiding scrutiny, though disappearing entirely." "I didn't disappear," he protested. "I was right where I've been since April. Physically, yes." She tilted her head, studying him. "But you withdrew from the community as surely as if you'd left the territory. People noticed, Jeremiah. Your absence created its own kind of presence, the mystery of why Daniel, Irwin's brother, chose solitude over society. The insight was uncomfortably accurate. It wasn't a conscious decision at first, he admitted. Just easier to focus on the immediate needs of the homestead than to engage with strangers. And later, he considered the question, grateful when the waitress arrived with their meals, giving him a moment to gather his thoughts. Later, it became a habit, he said finally. One that suited me, or so I thought. The quiet, the simplicity of days measured by practical tasks rather than social obligations. And now, her gaze was steady, challenging him to be equally honest. Now I'm not certain. He met her eyes directly. Something changed when you brought my mail that first day. The admission hung between them, more revealing than he'd intended. Zara's expression softened, but before she could respond, a shadow fell across their table. "Miss Patterson, what a pleasure to see you taking lunch here." The man who approached was well dressed in an Eastern-cut suit that marked him as someone of means. Tall and handsome in a conventional way, with dark hair and a precisely trimmed mustache, he exuded confidence. "And with company, I see." "Mr. Blackwood," Zara acknowledged, her tone cooling noticeably. "Yes, I'm having lunch with Mr. Irwin. He's one of the landowners affected by the new road proposal." Ah, the reclusive rancher emerges. Blackwood extended his hand to Jeremiah. "James Blackwood. I represent the Colorado Pacific Mining Company's interests in this area." "Jeremiah Irwin," he replied, shaking the offered hand with reserve. "Blackwood has been trying to acquire property around Wallace," Zara explained, a subtle warning in her tone. "The mining company has extensive plans for the region." "Expansion is progress, Miss Patterson," Blackwood said smoothly. "Wallace could become a significant hub with the right investment. Speaking of which," he turned to Jeremiah, "I'd be very interested in discussing your property, Mr. Irwin. The company pays generously for well-situated land." "It's not for sale," Jeremiah said immediately. "Everyone has a price," Blackwood replied with a practiced smile. "Especially for land inherited rather than chosen. I understand you were a bookkeeper in Denver. You must appreciate the financial calculations involved." Jeremiah felt a flare of irritation at the man's presumption. "The value of land isn't measured only in dollars, Mr. Blackwood." "Admirably poetic," Blackwood said, his smile not reaching his eyes, "but impractical. A man alone on 15 acres of mostly grassland, what future does that hold? The mining company could offer you a fresh start with capital to pursue more suitable endeavors." "Mr. Blackwood," Zara interrupted, her voice firm, "we were in the middle of a private lunch." The mining representative inclined his head. "Of course, forgive my intrusion." He produced a card from his waistcoat pocket and placed it on the table before Jeremiah. "When you're ready to discuss terms, I can be reached at the hotel. Good day to you both." As Blackwood departed, Jeremiah noted the tension in Zara's posture. "Not a favorite of yours, I take it. He represents everything I left Boston to escape," she said quietly. "Men who see the world as resources to be acquired and controlled, who measure worth in ledgers and deeds." He mentioned you specifically when he approached, Jeremiah observed. Has he been troubling you? A shadow crossed her face. He's been persistent in his attention since arriving in Wallace 2 months ago. Claims to admire independent women while making it clear he believes my position here is temporary acquainted venture before returning to my proper sphere. And that proper sphere would be as an ornamental wife to a man of ambition, naturally. Her tone was light, but couldn't quite mask the underlying frustration. My family's connections in Boston make me a suitable candidate in his eyes, despite my unorthodox choices. Jeremiah felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. He's made his intentions clear then. Increasingly so, she sighed. He's careful to maintain propriety calls at the post office during business hours, invitations to dine in public establishments, nothing that could be considered inappropriate. But there's a presumption in his manner I find unsettling. Have you told him you're not interested? In every way short of outright rudeness, which my position in the community doesn't afford me the luxury of displaying. She looked out the window, where Blackwood could be seen striding purposefully toward the hotel. He's not accustomed to rejection. Men like him rarely are. Their conversation turned to lighter topics as they finished their meal, but Jeremiah found himself watching the door, half expecting Blackwood to return. The man's interest in Zara troubled him more than he cared to admit, stirring protective instincts he hadn't known he possessed. As they left the cafe, Zara glanced at the son's position. I should return to the post office. The afternoon stage brings mail that needs sorting before closing. Of course. Jeremiah hesitated, then added, I need to visit the mercantile before heading back. There are supplies I've been putting off acquiring. Will you come by the post office before you leave town? She asked, a hint of vulnerability in the question. Yes, he promised. I'll check if there's any new mail before I go. She smiled, relief evident in her expression. I'll see you then. At the mercantile, Jeremiah found himself adding items to his list that he might have continued to do without in his solitary existence better coffee, a new lamp for evening reading, spices he'd never bothered with before. Schmidt watched with knowing eyes as he compiled his purchases. Planning for visitors, are we? The storekeeper asked as he tallied the bill. Just restocking, Jeremiah replied, though the question hit uncomfortably close to the truth. Miss Patterson's partial to cinnamon in her coffee, Schmidt offered casually, in case you were wondering. Jeremiah added a tin of cinnamon to his purchases without comment, ignoring the shopkeeper's knowing smile. By the time he'd loaded his supplies and completed his other errands, the afternoon was waning. The post office would be closing soon. He made his way there, finding the door still open but the counter unattended. Be right with you, Zara called from the back room. Jeremiah waited, taking in the orderly space. A notice board on one wall displayed announcements of community events, mail schedules, and official communications. Among them was a flyer for a harvest dance to be held the following Saturday at the town hall. Looking for something in particular? Zara asked, emerging from the back with a stack of letters in hand. Just checking if there's any mail for me before I head back, he said, though his eyes lingered on the dance announcement. She followed his gaze and smiled. The harvest dance is a Wallace tradition, apparently. Mrs. Simmons says it's been held every October since the town was founded. Will you attend? The question slipped out before he could reconsider it. I haven't decided. She set the letters down and began sorting them into the appropriate boxes. As the postmistress, I'm expected to participate in community events. But I confess I'm not particularly looking forward to being one of the few single women in attendance. Because of Blackwood, he guessed, she nodded. Among others, there's a significant imbalance in the eligible population here. Jeremiah gathered his courage. What if you had an escort? Someone to accompany you to the dance. Her hands stilled on the letters, and she looked up at him with a mixture of surprise and something else he couldn't quite define. Are you offering, Jeremiah? Yes, he said simply, if you'd like. A slow smile spread across her face. "I would like that very much. Then I'll come for you at 7 on Saturday," he said, feeling as though he'd just stepped off a precipice into open air, "at Mrs. Simmons's boarding house." "Yes." Her eyes held his, bright with pleasure. "The blue house on Pine Street just past the church." The post office door opened then, admitting an elderly gentleman who nodded to them both before proceeding to check his mail cubby. The interruption broke the moment, bringing Jeremiah back to an awareness of where they were. "I should let you finish your work," he said, reluctant to leave but conscious of the day's waning light, "and I need to start back before dark." "Of course." She handed him a single letter that had arrived on the afternoon stage. "Until Saturday, then." "Until Saturday," he agreed, tucking the letter into his pocket. The ride back to the homestead seemed shorter somehow, despite the gathering dusk. Jeremiah's mind was full of the day's events: the hearing, lunch with Zara, the encounter with Blackwood, and most significantly, his impulsive invitation to the dance. For the first time since arriving at Daniel's homestead, Jeremiah felt a sense of anticipation rather than resignation. He had committed to return to Wallace, to participate in a community event, to step back into the world of social interaction he had so carefully avoided these past months. And it was all because of a woman who had decided, for reasons he still didn't fully understand, to bring him his mail and stay for coffee. The days leading up to Saturday passed with agonizing slowness. Jeremiah threw himself into work around the homestead, completing tasks he'd been postponing and making improvements with a new sense of purpose. He repaired the gate to the corral, sealed the cracks around the cabin windows against the coming winter, and harvested the last vegetables from the garden. In quiet moments, doubts crept in. What did he know about escorting a woman to a dance? His social life in Denver had been limited at best, focused on occasional dinners with colleagues and the rare theater performance. Daniel had been the outgoing brother, comfortable in any gathering. Yet each time uncertainty threatened to overwhelm him, Jeremiah remembered Zara's smile when he'd extended the invitation, the warmth in her eyes that seemed to reach past his carefully constructed solitude. Saturday dawned clear and cold, with frost sparkling on the grass and the distant mountains sharp against the blue sky. Jeremiah spent the morning on necessary chores, then devoted the afternoon to preparations for the evening. He bathed meticulously, shaved with extra care, and donned his best clothes, the suit he'd brought from Denver but had worn only once for Daniel's funeral. The ride to Wallace seemed both endless and too short, his thoughts racing ahead to the evening. What if she'd changed her mind? What if he made a fool of himself? What if Blackwood was there, watching them with those calculating eyes? Mrs. Simmons's boarding house was exactly as Zara had described: a neat blue two-story structure with white trim and a welcoming porch. Lights glowed in the windows as Jeremiah approached, having stabled his horse at the livery. He straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and knocked on the door. It was opened by a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a knowing smile. "Mr. Irwin, I presume?" she said. "I'm Abigail Simmons. Do come in. Zara will be down presently." The parlor was comfortably furnished with well-worn pieces that spoke of a lifetime of use. Family photographs lined the mantel, and a patchwork quilt was draped over the back of a rocking chair. "It's good to finally meet you, Mrs. Simmons said, gesturing for him to take a seat. "Zara has spoken of you often since her visits to your homestead." "Has she?" he asked, both pleased and discomfited by the thought. "Indeed. She found your conversation stimulating and your coffee exceptional." The older woman's eyes twinkled with amusement. "High praise from our postmistress, who sets exacting standards." Before Jeremiah could formulate a response, there was a sound on the stairs. He turned to see Zara descending, and for a moment he forgot to breathe. She wore a dress of deep green velvet, simpler than the fashions he remembered from Denver, but somehow more elegant for its restraint. Her auburn hair was arranged in a style that softened her features, with a few artful curls framing her face. A gold locket at her throat caught the lamplight. "You look beautiful," he said, the words emerging before he could consider them. A blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you. You're quite handsome yourself, Jeremiah." Mrs. Simmons watched their exchange with undisguised approval. "You two run along now. The dance will be starting soon, and you don't want to miss the opening promenade." Outside, Zara slipped her hand into the crook of Jeremiah's arm as naturally as if they'd been attending events together for years. The town hall was only a few blocks away, its windows bright with lantern light, the sound of tuning instruments drifting into the street. "Nervous?" Zara asked as they approached. "Terrified," he admitted with a wry smile. "I haven't danced in years, neither have I, to be honest." Her grip on his arm tightened reassuringly. "We'll manage together." The hall had been transformed since the road hearing. Harvest decorations adorned the walls, sheaves of wheat, autumn leaves, and apple boughs arranged artfully around the room. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the gathering, and a small band of local musicians was assembled on a raised platform at one end. Couples and families were already arriving, the women in their best dresses, the men in suits or clean work clothes. Children darted between groups, excited by the special occasion and the promise of treats later in the evening. Jeremiah was acutely aware of the attention their entrance attracted. Zara, as one of the few unmarried women in Wallace, would have been a focus of interest regardless. But her arrival on his arm, the reclusive newcomer who had vanished for months, created a ripple of speculation through the room. "Ignore them," Zara murmured, sensing his discomfort. "They'll find something else to discuss once the dancing starts." She was right. As the band struck up the opening number and couples took to the floor, attention shifted to the festivities. Jeremiah led Zara to the dance floor with more confidence than he felt, grateful that the first dance was a simple waltz he remembered from his Denver days. "You dance well for someone out of practice," Zara observed as they moved together. "My mother insisted both her sons learn properly," he replied, "said it was as essential as reading and arithmetic for a gentleman's education." A wise woman. Zara followed his lead effortlessly, her hand light in his. "My mother had similar views, though she emphasized the practicality of securing suitable partners through social accomplishments." "And is that what you're doing tonight, securing a suitable partner?" He meant it teasingly, but there was a genuine question beneath. Her eyes met his, serious despite her smile. "I'm dancing with a man whose company I enjoy, Jeremiah. The suitability of it is for me alone to determine." The directness of her answer warmed him more than any flirtatious response could have. They continued dancing, conversation flowing easily between them. Zara introduced him to various townsfolk, the schoolteacher, the blacksmith and his wife, the banker and his family. To his surprise, Jeremiah found himself remembering names, engaging in brief conversations, feeling less like an outsider with each interaction. During a break in the dancing, they sampled the refreshments laid out on long tables: cider, coffee, and an array of baked goods contributed by various households. Jeremiah was reaching for cups of cider when he felt a presence beside him. "Quite the transformation, Mr. Irwin," James Blackwood said smoothly. "From hermit to social butterfly in the span of a week." "Mr. Blackwood," Jeremiah acknowledged coolly, enjoying the dance immensely. The mining representative's gaze drifted to where Zara stood conversing with the schoolteacher. "Though I confess disappointment that Miss Patterson's dance card was filled before I could secure a place on it." "Perhaps next time," Jeremiah said, though the thought of Zara dancing with Blackwood sent an unexpected surge of possessiveness through him. "Indeed." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though I wonder if there will be many next times for you in Wallace. The pull of solitude is strong, I hear, especially for those unaccustomed to community life." "I'm finding reasons to visit more regularly," Jeremiah replied evenly. "Yes, I can see that." Blackwood's gaze was calculating. "Miss Patterson is certainly compelling company. But do consider my offer regarding your property, Mr. Irwin. A man's circumstances can change quickly out here. Having capital provides options. Before Jeremiah could respond, the band began tuning for the next set. He excused himself and returned to Zara, handing her a cup of cider. "What did Blackwood want?" she asked, having observed their interaction from across the room. "To remind me of his interest in my land," Jeremiah replied, "and to express disappointment at not securing a dance with you. He's persistent, I'll give him that." She sipped her cider. "Did he make another offer for the homestead?" "Not specifically, just suggestions that I should consider my options." Jeremiah found himself watching Blackwood, who was now engaged in conversation with several town council members. "I don't trust him. There's something calculated in his interest. The mining company he represents has been buying land throughout the territory," Zara said quietly. "Some say they're securing right-of-ways for future railways. Others that they've discovered mineral deposits they're keeping quiet about until they control enough acreage. And what do you think?" "I think power concentrating in too few hands rarely benefits a community." Her expression was troubled. "Several families west of town have already sold out. Blackwood is very persuasive, especially with those struggling financially." The band struck up a lively reel, and Zara's mood lightened. "But tonight is for dancing, not worrying about James Blackwood and his ambitions." "Shall we?" they rejoined the dancers, and for the next hour Jeremiah forgot about Blackwood, about his concerns, about everything except the joy of moving in time with Zara. She was a natural dancer, her steps sure and her laughter infectious as they navigated the more complicated patterns. By the time the band announced the final waltz of the evening, Jeremiah was flushed with exertion and happiness. He led Zara onto the floor one last time, drawing her slightly closer than propriety strictly dictated. "Thank you," he said softly as they began to move to the music. "For what?" "For bringing my mail that day, for staying for coffee, for—" he searched for words. "For seeing past the hermit to the man beneath, I suppose." Her eyes held his, something vulnerable and open in their green depths. "Perhaps I recognized something in you that I understood. The desire for solitude isn't always about avoiding others. Sometimes it's about finding yourself first." "And have you found yourself?" "I'm still looking," she admitted, "but I feel closer to knowing who I am and what I want than I ever did in Boston." The music swelled around them, and Jeremiah was struck by how right it felt to hold her, to move together in the lantern-lit hall among the people of Wallace. For the first time since Daniel's death, he felt connected to something beyond his grief and isolation. "Would you allow me to escort you home?" he asked as the final notes faded. "I would like that very much," she replied. They thanked the hosts, gathered Zara's shawl, and stepped out into the crisp October night. Stars blazed overhead in the clear mountain air, and their breath formed small clouds as they walked slowly toward the boarding house. "Will you stay in town tonight?" Zara asked. "Mrs. Simmons mentioned the hotel has vacant rooms and the ride back in the dark can be treacherous." "I hadn't planned to," Jeremiah admitted, "but perhaps it would be wiser." "Then I'll see you tomorrow before you leave." There was a hopeful note in her question. "Yes," he promised. "I'll come by the boarding house before I head back." They reached Mrs. Simmons's front porch, and Jeremiah hesitated, uncertain of the proper protocol. In Denver, he would have simply bid her good night with a formal handshake. But here now, after an evening of dancing and conversation that had shifted something fundamental between them. Zara solved his dilemma by rising on tiptoe and pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. "Thank you for a wonderful evening, Jeremiah," she whispered. "Sleep well." Before he could respond, she had slipped inside, leaving him standing on the porch with his heart racing and his cheek warm from her touch. The walk to the hotel seemed to pass in a daze, his mind replaying the evening, the dances, their conversations, the moment of connection during the final waltz when the rest of the room had seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them. As he lay in the unfamiliar hotel bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Jeremiah acknowledged the truth he'd been avoiding. He was falling in love with Zara Patterson. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. It had been so long since he'd allowed himself to feel anything beyond the dull ache of grief and the simple satisfaction of completing physical tasks. Now his heart was awakening, and with it came all the uncertainty and vulnerability he'd been avoiding. What did Zara feel? Was her interest in him merely kindness toward a lonely man or something deeper? And if it was deeper, what future could they possibly have? She was the postmistress of Wallace, integrated into the community. He lived miles away on a homestead he wasn't even certain he wanted to keep. Sleep came eventually, but his dreams were filled with dancing figures and the echo of Zara's laughter. Morning brought clarity with the sunlight streaming through the hotel window. Whatever uncertainties lay ahead, Jeremiah knew he didn't want to return to the isolation that had defined his life these past months. The community he'd glimpsed last night, the warmth of shared celebration, the simple pleasure of connection called to something in him that had been dormant since Daniel's death. After breakfast, he settled his hotel bill and walked to Mrs. Simmons's boarding house. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. Wallace was quieter on Sunday morning, with many residents attending church services. Mrs. Simmons answered his knock, dressed in her Sunday best. "Mr. Irwin, good morning. Zara mentioned you might call before heading back to your homestead. Is she available?" he asked, hat in hand. "She's in the garden out back." The older woman's eyes were knowing. "Go around through the side gate." "I'm off to church, but you're welcome to join us for Sunday dinner at 1 if you'd care to stay." Jeremiah thanked her and made his way to the garden, where he found Zara seated on a wooden bench beneath an apple tree. She wore a simple dress of deep blue, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way he hadn't seen before. A book lay open in her lap, but she was gazing thoughtfully into the distance. "Good morning," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, a smile lighting her face. "Jeremiah." "You came. I promised I would." He gestured to the bench. "May I join you?" She moved over, making space beside her. "Of course. Did you sleep well at the hotel?" "Well enough." He settled beside her, aware of the proper distance to maintain, yet wishing he could sit closer. "Mrs. Simmons invited me to Sunday dinner, but I should probably start back soon. The cattle need tending." Disappointment flickered across her face before she composed her expression. "Of course. The responsibilities of a rancher don't observe the Sabbath. I could come back," he heard himself saying. "Next weekend, perhaps?" Her smile returned, brightening her eyes. "I would like that, though the journey is long just for a visit." "Not too long for the right reason," he said, gathering his courage. "Zara, last night I haven't enjoyed myself so much in years. Being with you, dancing with you, it made me realize how much I've been missing by hiding away at the homestead." "You weren't hiding," she said gently. "You were healing." The understanding in her words touched something deep within him. "Perhaps, but I think it's time to rejoin the world. And that is, I hope you might be part of that process." A slight blush colored her cheeks. "Are you courting me, Jeremiah Irwin?" "I'm trying to," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Rather ineptly, I'm afraid. It's been a long time since I've done anything like this." "Then let me make it easier for you." Her hand found his on the bench between them. "I would be very pleased to be courted by you. In fact, I've been hoping you might ask since that second time I brought your mail." Warmth spread through him at her touch and her words. Even then. Her eyes held his, honest and direct as always. "There was something about you, sitting in that cabin surrounded by books and solitude, that called to me, a depth of feeling beneath the quiet exterior. I wanted to know the man behind the reserve. And now that you're beginning to know him." "Now I'm certain I want to know more." Her fingers tightened on his. "But Jeremiah, courting means you'll need to come to town more regularly than once every 3 months." He laughed, feeling lighter than he had in ages. "I think that can be arranged. Though perhaps you might still bring my mail occasionally. I've grown rather fond of our coffee conversations." "I think that could be arranged as well," she replied with a smile. though Mrs. Simmons is beginning to tease me about my special delivery service." They sat together in the garden until the church bells rang, signaling the end of services. Reluctantly, Jeremiah acknowledged it was time for him to start back to the homestead if he wanted to arrive before dark. At the front gate, he took both her hands in his. "I'll come next Saturday," he promised, "earlier in the day so we have more time together." "I'll look forward to it." She hesitated, then added, "Be careful on the ride back. The weather can change quickly this time of year." Her concern warmed him. "I will. Until Saturday, then." The temptation to kiss her properly was strong, but Jeremiah restrained himself, conscious of neighbors returning from church who might observe them. Instead, he raised her hand to his lips briefly before taking his leave. The ride back to the homestead passed in a haze of anticipation and planning. For the first time, Jeremiah found himself thinking of the future not as an endless succession of solitary days, but as something bright with possibility. True to his word, Jeremiah returned to Wallace the following Saturday and the Saturday after that. Each visit strengthened the connection growing between him and Zara. They took walks along the creek that ran behind the town, shared meals at the cafe, and spent hours in conversation that ranged from books they had both read to their hopes and dreams for the future. On his fourth consecutive weekend visit, as October gave way to November and the first snow dusted the higher elevations, Jeremiah arrived with a proposal that had been forming in his mind. They were walking along the main street, bundled against the chill, when he broached the subject. "I've been thinking about the homestead," he began carefully. "Oh," Zara glanced at him, curious. "It's a lot of land for one person to manage, especially someone who didn't grow up ranching." He took a deep breath. "I'm considering selling part of it not to Blackwood or the mining company," he added quickly, seeing her expression change, "but perhaps to the Callahan family to the south. They've mentioned wanting to expand their grazing land." "That's a significant decision," she said, her tone neutral. "Are you certain?" "I'm certain I don't need 15 acres to be content." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "What I'm less certain about is where I should make my home going forward." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Are you considering moving to Wallace?" "I'm considering being where you are," he said simply. "The trips back and forth are becoming difficult, not because of the distance but because leaving you gets harder each time." A blush colored her cheeks, visible even in the cold. "Jeremiah." "I don't expect an answer today," he hastened to add. "I know we've only been courting for a month, but I wanted you to know I'm thinking about the future, our future, if you'll have me in it." She was quiet for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. Then she took his hand, tucking it into the crook of her arm as they resumed walking. "I've been offered a position," she said after a few steps. "The Postal Service is expanding its operations in Colorado Territory, and they need someone to oversee several new offices being established along the proposed railway line." Jeremiah felt a cold that had nothing to do with the November air. "You're leaving Wallace?" "Not necessarily." She squeezed his arm reassuringly. "The position would require travel to the new offices initially, but I could choose where to base myself. Wallace is one option." "When would this start?" "Spring, if I accept." She looked up at him, her expression serious. "I haven't given them an answer yet. I wanted to see where things stood between us before deciding." Relief flooded through him. "And where do things stand from your perspective?" She stopped again, turning to face him fully. Despite being on the main street where anyone might observe them, her gaze was direct and unflinching. "I'm in love with you, Jeremiah Irwin," she said quietly. "I think I have been since that day in your cabin when we talked through the storm. I love your thoughtfulness, your quiet strength, the way you see the world through a bookkeeper's precision and a poet's heart." His own heart seemed to stop at her words, then race ahead. "Zara, you don't need to say it back," she interrupted gently. "Not until you're certain. I just wanted you to know where I stand as you consider your future plans." But he was certain. Had been for weeks, perhaps since that first dance when she'd fit so perfectly in his arms. "I love you too," he said, the words emerging with surprising ease. "More than I thought possible after all that happened. You brought me back to life, Zara. First with mail delivery, then with coffee, and now with everything." Her eyes shimmered with emotion. "Then perhaps we should discuss our future plans together rather than separately." "Perhaps we should," he agreed, resisting the urge to kiss her then and there on Wallace's Main Street. They walked on, both silent as they absorbed the significance of what had just been shared. At the corner near the post office, James Blackwood emerged from the hotel, spotting them immediately. "Miss Patterson, Mr. Irwin," he called, approaching with his customary confidence. "What a pleasure to see you both. I trust you're enjoying our brisk November weather, Mr. Blackwood," Zara acknowledged coolly. "Yes, it's a fine day for a walk, indeed." His gaze moved between them, noting their linked arms with obvious disapproval. "I was just coming to find you, Miss Patterson. I received a letter from mutual acquaintances in Boston, the Harringtons. They asked me to convey their regards." "How kind of them," Zara replied, though her posture had stiffened at the mention of Boston society. "Please return the sentiment when you write next. They expressed surprise at your continued, rustic adventure," Blackwood continued, his tone suggesting he shared their view. "Mrs. Harrington mentioned your parents' hope for your return by Christmas." Jeremiah felt Zara's grip on his arm tighten. "My parents are well aware of my commitment to my position here," she said evenly. "Any hopes for my return are their own, not mine." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Family ties are powerful things, Miss Patterson, as are the social connections one forms in youth." He glanced at Jeremiah dismissively. "New acquaintances, however pleasant, rarely hold the same weight." "You presume too much, Mr. Blackwood," Zara replied, an edge entering her voice. "About my family, my intentions, and my relationships. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have other matters to attend to." Without waiting for his response, she urged Jeremiah forward, her pace quick as they continued down the street. Only when they'd turned the corner did she slow, releasing a tense breath. "I apologize," she said. "He has a particular talent for provocation." "No apology needed." Jeremiah covered her hand with his. "Though I'm curious about these Harringtons and their correspondence with Blackwood." "Old family friends," she explained, her expression troubled. "The daughter, Eleanor, was my schoolmate." "I'm surprised they're in contact with Blackwood, though perhaps I shouldn't be. Boston society is interconnected, especially among those with business interests. Do you think he's reporting back to your parents about you, about us?" "It wouldn't surprise me," she sighed. "My father has connections throughout New England and beyond. When I left, he made it clear he considered it a temporary rebellion that would run its course." "And is it?" Jeremiah asked, unable to keep the concern from his voice. "A temporary rebellion," she stopped, turning to face him again. "No, Jeremiah, this is my life now, the one I've chosen." Her eyes held his, steady and sure. "Whatever future we build together, it won't be in Boston." Relief washed through him at her certainty. "Then perhaps we should discuss what that future might look like," he suggested. "Somewhere more private than the middle of Wallace's streets." They ended up at the small public garden behind the church, which was deserted in the November chill. Seated on a stone bench beneath a bare, branched maple, they talked of possibilities, Jeremiah selling part of the homestead, but keeping the cabin and enough land for a modest operation. Zara accepting the new postal position, but based in Wallace, their courtship continuing through the winter with an understanding about where it was leading. "Spring," Zara said decisively. "By spring, we'll both know for certain if this is what we want." "I already know," Jeremiah replied, taking her gloved hands in his, "but I understand your caution. Spring it is." As the weeks passed, and November turned to December, their courtship deepened despite the challenges of winter travel. Jeremiah made the journey to Wallace when weather permitted, sometimes staying overnight at the hotel to avoid dangerous return trips in darkness or storm. Zara visited the homestead twice, bringing Christmas cookies from Mrs. Simmons on her second trip, and staying for the afternoon while Jeremiah showed her the improvements he'd made to the cabin. Winter in the Colorado Territory was harsh but beautiful. Snow blanketed the landscape, transforming the familiar terrain into something magical. On clear days, the mountains stood out sharp and white against the blue sky. During storms, the world narrowed to the warm interior of the cabin or the boarding house parlor. 2 weeks before Christmas, a blizzard swept through the region, closing roads and isolating outlying homesteads. Jeremiah had planned to travel to Wallace that weekend, but found himself snowbound instead. As the days passed and the drifts grew higher, he realized he might not make it to town before the holiday. On the 4th day of the storm, as he was checking on the cattle in the barn, he heard an unexpected sound: sleigh bells approaching through the snow. Hurrying to the yard, he was astonished to see a horse-drawn sleigh making its way up the track to the homestead, Callahan's teenage son driving, and a familiar figure bundled in furs beside him. "Zara," he called in disbelief as the sleigh drew closer. "Special delivery." She called back, her voice carrying in the cold air. "Since you couldn't come to town, I thought I'd bring Christmas to you." The sleigh pulled up to the gate, and Jeremiah hurried to help her down, his heart racing at the unexpected joy of seeing her. "This is madness," he said, even as he gathered her in a careful embrace. "The roads must be treacherous." "Mr. Callahan said the worst of it passed yesterday," she replied, her cheeks pink with cold and excitement. "When we realized you might be stuck out here through Christmas, young Thomas offered to bring me in their sleigh. It handles the snow much better than a regular wagon." Thomas Callahan, 16 and clearly enjoying his role in the adventure, began unloading packages from the back of the sleigh. "Ma sent food," he explained. "Said no one should be alone at Christmas without proper victuals." Inside the cabin, which Jeremiah was suddenly seeing through new eyes, noting the unswept floor and dishes from breakfast still on the table, Zara unwrapped her outer layers while Thomas brought in the packages. "There's more folks snowed in than just Mr. Irwin," the boy said to Zara. "Pa's taking the big sleigh out to the Johnson place tomorrow. I can come back for you then, or the next day if you'd prefer." Jeremiah glanced at Zara, uncertain how to respond. The implication that she might stay overnight at the cabin, unchaperoned, hung in the air between them. "Tomorrow would be best," she said firmly, making the decision for them. "Mrs. Simmons will worry if I'm gone too long, and I have mail to sort before Christmas." Relief and disappointment mingled in Jeremiah's chest at her practical response. Of course she wouldn't stay. It would be improper, potentially damaging to her reputation in Wallace. Yet the thought of a single evening in her company, away from the curious eyes of the town, held undeniable appeal. Once Thomas had departed, promising to return the following afternoon, Jeremiah and Zara unpacked the provisions Mrs. Callahan had sent: a ham, fresh bread, preserves, a Christmas pudding, and a bottle of cider. There were also packages wrapped in brown paper and tied with red ribbon. "Early Christmas gifts," Zara explained. "From me, Mrs. Simmons, and a few others in town who have come to know you through your visits." "I have nothing for you," Jeremiah admitted, chagrined. "Your gift is in town at the hotel. I was planning to bring it this weekend." "Then you'll give it to me when you finally make it to Wallace," she said practically. "Consider this an advance on the holiday." They prepared a meal together from Mrs. Callahan's provisions, moving around the small kitchen with a domestic ease that felt both new and somehow familiar. Zara set the table while Jeremiah sliced the ham and warmed the bread in the oven. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting past the window. "It's beautiful here in winter," Zara observed as they sat down to eat. "Different from Boston's snows, wilder somehow." "Everything is more elemental out here," Jeremiah agreed. "The weather, the land, the way people connect to both." "Is that why you've decided to stay, the connection to the land?" He considered her question thoughtfully. "Partly. There's something honest about the work, immediate and tangible in a way bookkeeping never was, but it's more than that." "What else then?" "This place was Daniel's dream," he said slowly. When I first came, I felt like an imposter, just going through the motions until I decided what to do next. But over time, I've come to understand what he saw here: the potential, the freedom, the chance to build something that's truly your own. Zara nodded, understanding in her eyes. That's what I found in the post office. My own small domain where I make the decisions, where my competence is what matters, not my family connections or social standing. Exactly. Their eyes met across the table, the connection between them deepening with shared understanding. Though I've realized the freedom of solitude has its limits, a life needs connections to be truly rich. Connections like bringing mail and staying for coffee, she asked, a smile playing at her lips. Like that, yes. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Zara, these past months since you first rode up to my gate have changed everything. I was existing before, just going through the motions. Now I'm living again, looking forward instead of back. Her fingers tightened around his. I feel the same way. In Boston, my life was predetermined: the proper husband, the proper home, the proper social engagements. Even coming west was an act of rebellion more than a positive choice at first. But now, he prompted when she hesitated. Now I'm choosing someone, for reasons that have nothing to do with propriety or rebellion, just because it feels right. Her eyes were bright with emotion. You feel right, Jeremiah. The simple honesty of her words moved him deeply. Setting aside his fork, he rose and came around the table, drawing her to her feet. Without hesitation, he cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her, a tender meeting of lips that held all the promise of future kisses to come. She responded with a sweetness that took his breath away, her hands coming to rest on his chest as she leaned into him. When they finally parted, her eyes remained closed for a moment, as though savoring the sensation. I've been wanting to do that since the harvest dance, he admitted softly. I've been hoping you would, she replied, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a golden haze of conversation and quiet companionship. They exchanged stories of their lives before meeting Jeremiah's childhood in Illinois with Daniel, his move to Denver after their parents' deaths, his years working for the mercantile, Zara's privileged upbringing in Boston, her education at a private girls' school, her gradual realization that the life mapped out for her felt like a beautifully furnished cage. As darkness fell and the snow continued, Jeremiah built up the fire and lit the lamps. The small cabin felt cozy rather than confining, the howl of the wind outside making the warmth within all the more precious. I should prepare a place for you to sleep, he said reluctantly as the evening wore on. You can take the bedroom, I'll make a pallet here by the fire. Thank you, she said, though there was a shadow of something regret, uncertainty, in her eyes. It's probably for the best if Thomas comes early tomorrow. Jeremiah cleared his throat, suddenly nervous. Zara, I want you to know I hope you understand my intentions toward you are honorable. A smile curved her lips. I never doubted that, Jeremiah. Good. He ran a hand through his hair, searching for the right words. Because I've been thinking about what we discussed about spring and decisions and our future. And, she prompted when he paused, and I don't want to wait until spring to tell you that I want to marry you. The words came out in a rush, his heart pounding. I love you, Zara. These months of courtship have only confirmed what I think I knew that first day when you brought my mail, that you're the woman I want to build a life with. Her eyes widened, and for a terrible moment he feared he'd spoken too soon, pushed too hard. Then she crossed to him, taking both his hands in hers. Are you proposing, Jeremiah Irwin? She asked, her voice steady despite the emotion shining in her eyes. Not properly, he admitted. I don't have a ring yet, and I'd planned something more romantic than a snowbound cabin. This is perfectly romantic, she assured him, squeezing his hands. And yes, I want to marry you too. I don't need to wait until spring to know that. Joy surged through him, bright and overwhelming. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise he felt in his heart. She returned the kiss with equal fervor, her body warm and yielding against his, When they finally parted, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "When?" he asked simply. "April," she replied without hesitation, "when the roads are clear and travel is easier. My new position with the Postal Service begins in May, and I'd like us to be settled before then. April it is." He kissed her again, briefly this time. "Where will we live?" "I've been thinking about that," she said, her expression turning thoughtful. "What if we kept the homestead but also found a small place in town? I'll need to be in Wallace for my work, but we could spend weekends and summers at the cabin, the best of both worlds." The suggestion was so practical, so perfectly aligned with what he'd been considering himself, that Jeremiah laughed with delight. "That's exactly what I'd hoped for. I don't want to give up Daniel's place entirely, but I understand your work keeps you in town. And this way you can continue the ranching operations on a scale that makes sense for us," she added. "Perhaps even expand eventually if you find you truly enjoy it." "Us," he repeated, savoring the word, "our future together." They stayed up late into the night, planning and dreaming by the firelight. When at last exhaustion overtook them, Jeremiah reluctantly showed Zara to the bedroom, lingering at the door. "Good night," he said softly. "I love you." "I love you too," she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him one more time. "Sleep well." Morning brought clear skies and brilliant sunshine that turned the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling white expanse. They breakfasted together, comfortable in the knowledge of decisions made and a future agreed upon. Thomas Callahan arrived shortly after midday, and Jeremiah helped Zara bundle up for the journey back to Wallace. At the sleigh, he kissed her once more, not caring what the young driver might think. "I'll come to town as soon as the roads are passable," he promised. "We have an engagement to announce and plans to make." "I'll be waiting," she said, her smile bright with promise, with coffee ready. True to his word, Jeremiah made the journey to Wallace 3 days later, bearing the Christmas gift he'd purchased for Zara, a delicate gold bracelet he'd ordered from Denver months earlier. The town was alive with holiday preparations, evergreen boughs decorating storefronts and candles glowing in windows. News of their engagement spread quickly through Wallace, meeting with widespread approval. Mrs. Simmons was particularly delighted, having predicted their match from the start. Plans were made for an April wedding at the small church, with a celebration afterward that would include the entire community. Christmas came and went in a flurry of festivities, with Jeremiah joining the Simmons household for dinner and participating in town celebrations with a joy he hadn't expected to feel again after Daniel's death. The new year brought renewed purpose as he and Zara began preparations for their spring wedding and shared life. In February, Jeremiah sold a portion of the homestead to the Callahan family, retaining the cabin and 5 acres including the creek and cottonwood stand. With the proceeds, he purchased a small house on Pine Street, just 3 doors down from the post office. It needed work-fresh paint, repairs to the porch, a new roof, but by March, it was transformed into a cozy home awaiting Zara's touch. April arrived with its promise of renewal, the land greening after winter's dormancy. Cherry blossoms and wildflowers dotted the landscape as the town of Wallace gathered to witness the union of their postmistress and the once reclusive rancher. Zara was radiant in a gown of ivory silk, simpler than what she might have worn in Boston but perfect for a bride in Colorado territory. Jeremiah, waiting at the altar in his new suit, felt his breath catch as she walked toward him on the arm of Mr. Simmons, who had agreed to give her away in her father's absence. Their vows were traditional but spoken with deep personal meaning, each word a promise built on months of growing love and understanding. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jeremiah kissed his bride with a tenderness that spoke of all they had found in each other and all they would build together. The celebration afterward was everything a small-town wedding should be: tables laden with food contributed by friends and neighbors, music from local musicians, dancing that continued well into the evening. Even James Blackwood, who had remained in Wallace pursuing his mining company's interests, offered grudging congratulations before departing early. As darkness fell and lanterns were lit around the town hall, Jeremiah led Zara in a waltz that echoed their first dance at the Harvest Festival. "Happy, Mrs. Irwin?" he asked softly. "Completely," she replied, her eyes shining with love, "though I'll still be Miss Patterson at the post office, professionally speaking." "Of course," he agreed with a smile. The most efficient postmistress in Colorado Territory should keep her established name. "And you?" she asked. "Are you happy, Mr. Irwin?" He drew her slightly closer, propriety be damned now that they were married. "More than I ever imagined possible when you rode up to my gate last September." "Who would have thought," she mused, "that mail delivery and coffee could lead to this?" "I'm grateful every day that you decided to bring my mail," he said seriously. "That you saw something worth knowing in the hermit rancher. And I'm grateful you invited me in that first day," she replied. "That you made room in your solitude for one persistent postmistress." Later, as they walked hand in hand to their new home on Pine Street, the stars blazing overhead in the clear April sky, Jeremiah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From grief and isolation to love and connection, from a man who didn't go to town for months to one who now had a place in the community of Wallace. All because a determined woman had started bringing the mail and staying for coffee. "What are you thinking?" Zara asked as they reached their front porch. "That sometimes the best things in life arrive unexpectedly," he replied, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Like love delivered special post." The years that followed proved the truth of that observation. Zara excelled in her expanded role with the Postal Service, overseeing the establishment of new offices throughout the growing territory while maintaining her base in Wallace. Jeremiah divided his time between their townhouse and the homestead, developing the smaller ranch operation into a modest success, while also using his bookkeeping skills to assist local businesses. Their first child, a son they named Daniel after Jeremiah's brother, arrived a year after their wedding, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Eleanor. The family split their time between town and country, the children thriving with both the social connections of Wallace and the freedom of the homestead. Wallace itself grew as the railroad eventually came through, bringing new residents and opportunities. The Irwins became fixtures in the community, their unusual beginning the hermit and the postmistress becoming a favorite local story. On their 10th anniversary, Jeremiah surprised Zara with a special gift, an album containing pressed flowers from the homestead, letters they had exchanged during their courtship, and photographs documenting their life together. The final page held the string that had tied that first bundle of mail she had brought to his gate. "You kept this?" she asked in amazement, touching the simple twine. "Of course," he replied, his love for her as strong as ever after a decade of marriage. It tied together more than just letters and packages. It was the beginning of everything that mattered. Zara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder as they sat on the porch of the homestead cabin, watching their children play near the cottonwoods that had been saved from the road construction all those years ago. "We've built a good life, haven't we?" she said softly. "The best," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "All because you were too stubborn to let me disappear and I was wise enough to make a second cup of coffee." She laughed, the sound still as bright and joyful as it had been that first afternoon when thunder had rumbled overhead and a postmistress from Boston had brought mail to a reclusive rancher, changing both their lives forever.